Well, when you say Seven Sisters, for most people, I think of the Orion and Pleiades, so the Pleiades star constellation Orion. And it is, in fact, that as well. Anywhere in the world where you can see the Orion Pleiade, every Indigenous culture will have a story. But the story is reflected on the land. So it depends on the type of environment, how the story shapes. Because the songline that actually is reflected in the sky is actually holding the critical knowledge you need in order to survive in that land, in that climate, with the particular social structure you have. So these cutesy little stories that Lynne referred to are cutesy little stories, so people will remember them and pass them on and sit around the campfire and tell stories. But they are the encyclopedia of life. Now we're talking about text, non-text-based societies. So this is why oral traditions will last far longer than stuff in books, and then we'll get on to that later. Now, just for an example, in the just to give you a quickie, the Seven Sister stories that we work with across this continent are basically this. There's an ancestral being in the shape of a man who relentlessly pursues these seven sisters. Seven is a white fella's number, it could have been this many or that many. The sisters across the country, and in order to possess them, ostensibly looking for a wife, maybe 7 wives, but wrongfully pursuing them according to the skin group system. He's not supposed to be chasing these ladies. So off he goes chasing them. But he's a shapeshifter. So in order to lure them to him, in order to possess them, he needs to shift into all the delectable foods in season, the water, the shade, all the stuff you need in order to survive in the desert. So he turns into edible snakes, and then he'll turn into a shade and they'll come to him. And in the story, if you're in a certain part of the country, the story will have the variation where the sisters, to get away from him, they dive into a waterhole and they swim the subterranean waterways. That tells you when you're there, don't go looking for water on the surface, because that's not where it is. So it'll vary. All the encounters across the country will be totally specific to what you need to know in that piece of country. There's a part where they say, oh, he got too close to us, so we took off, and they flew 100 kilometres to another site. Well, that's not because they wanted the wind in their hair. It's because they're telling you, don't even try. There's no water or resources along this stretch. See this? Well, this is one of those sites that are linked up along the songline. You would have heard the expression, our history is written in the land, our stories in the land. The land is it's indexed in the land. The land is our mnemonic, our library. So when you hear, well, this is a classic example, isn't it? So this spiritual being called, in this case, Nuru, he all sorts of devilish deeds occurred at this site, and he's definitely there. And we camp at the bottom. His name's this place is called Kurala. I'll just call him the lustful pursuer or something. And so he's definitely there, as you can see. And we all camp at the bottom. I'm with the ladies, everyone speaks in really hushed tones, so it's not too exciting. And there's lots of evidence of the story. There's red, there's blood where something happened, and then there's handprints, and there's all sorts of the stories all over the place. There's ledges of rock ledges with white smoke rings naturally occurring, which women you might see in paint on the breast, which are about when they're trying to heal the bigger sister after he got her, and so on, right? So it's all there, just all over the place. But but just to tell you how dynamic the culture is, that it's not a past story, it's still alive. So we're camping there on this journey, doing the transit of the stars and getting all the stuff you get. And I came out of my tent one morning, like 6 a.m, and one of the ladies said, hey, did he come to you last night? I said, yeah, of course. Didn't he come to you? No. What happened? I said, well, you know what he's like. So I just tease you, and she's, because it's, anyway, this is very much part of the culture, this teasing bit too. So I'm saying, and then we didn't talk about it. And the next minute they're all whispering around the camp. And then 18 months later, they all ended up in Canberra, because we had a huge mob of elders for this whole Songlines exhibition. So they all turned up, and there I am. They walk in the door, and there I am sitting nursing a brown baby, who you might see at the end if we get to it. And they said, you know, they were all, you know, talking in low voices, and he's called Waddy Neuro. I said, oh, Waddy Neuro, little Waddy Neuro, and they're calling him that. And I said, oh, I was a bit old, so I gave it to my daughter to have, because, you know. Anyway, so this became part of the story almost, right? That this clearly, it wasn't mine, it was my grandson, just in case you. Not that that's the only reality in the story I'm telling you by the people who are listening. It doesn't mean it has to be physical. Things happen, you know, and IVF and so on. So the main point of the story is they, to this day, he call him Waddy 7, they call him Waddy Neuro. They talk low in front, and it doesn't mean he's only a lustful pursuit. It means he's also a clever man, can make things happen, shapeshift. There's a whole multi-dimensional character. So the only way I get my daughter to let them call him Waddy Neuro. Anyway, sorry, I'm going on. But you can see, and the other, this, I won't tell a story, I'll just show you. I go backwards clearly. See that one there? That's again, there's another story in the land. There's the man there, Bernard Newbury, pointing up to this. It represents, it's him with a top knot. You see, so there's a whole lot of stories about that. There's holes in the rock where he put things in that he shouldn't have, and all sorts of stuff. And so just again, a second example in the whole country, when you know these stories, it's party, you walk amongst your relatives in the land every day.
I just wanted to raise the subject of Bruce Chatwin, because for some of us, the first time we'd heard of Songlines was because of his book, which was written in the 1987.
Yeah.
So, and at the time, I remember there was a bit of controversy. Can you give me your take on Bruce Chatwin's Songlines?
Well, the reason the word Songlines is kind of, you know, everyone knows it, Americans particularly. He's a British journalist. You might know more about him than me. He had a whole, his interest was sort of nomads. And he, you know, nomadic lifestyles, and, you know, the kind of stuff we're talking about, really, well, what do they know? How do they know it? How does it work? What's, you know, genuine interest. We are talking 1987 or before that. And he went to Africa, he went lots of places. But he sort of popped into Australia for about 12 weeks, 8 or 12 weeks, zapped around. Mind you, he's tuned to the idea of, he got that Aboriginal people, or people who live with the land, with the earth, have this other uncanny way of not only navigation, but he did unfortunately use that word a bit much, so it did give him a hard time. But so my take is, I think I would give him great credit for what he did, that he picked up in 8 weeks the essence. So when we're talking about dreamings and dream time, that just puts us back into primitivist mode. At least the word song lines takes us into a space that, and a song means more than song. Song means performance, means all the embodied ways of imparting knowledge, right? So that's the primary mode of knowledge transmission is performance. So he sort of got it, you know. He tried to explain it. Can you imagine? He followed a mob around, went here, there, and everywhere, heard stories, obviously tuned to it. And he, you know, he's sort of using images like the roots of the way lines were like musical notes, or so he used all this. And so those who wanted to get into, like those archaeologists and anthropologists who've been trying to work out how to explain this for decades, they all had their nose out of joints, because he got it in a word, he clinched it, right? And if you read the book, I'm sure many of you have, he really got the essence of it. And I think that's quite remarkable. And I was working with the academics and that, and they all poo-pah and carry on. I said, well, you're just jealous because you didn't come up with it. You've been working this for decades, and no one has a clue what you're talking about. So, and then it led to all this. I mean, really, because I think that word, and if you ask the Aboriginal people, they'll tell you that's their word. This is Aboriginal. We're really good at appropriating what I call, we all are actually, calling, it's a cross-cultural passport. That's what their term is. Just like dreamings was, and each area has their own actual language word with its Altjara or wherever you are.
On on that, thanks, Margo. On that note of cross-cultural, it's sort of like an international passport, isn't it?
Yep.
To knowledge. Could you expand on that, Lynne? Because a lot of your studies have been looking for the same patterns in other cultures.
Yes, my work's on how these memory systems actually work, because in Western society, we really have outsourced our memories to technology. So basically, with a songline is at each location, rituals are performed. Now, ritual is a word that means repeated events. It means nothing more than that. So those rituals, ceremony and so on, but ceremony uses the most effective memory techniques of story, song, narrative, story, and movement, which all make information more memorable. If you've seen the studies on people with late onset dementia, really completely non-responsive, play familiar music and they'll respond, because deep in the neuroscience, the brain, music is one of the last things we lose, and in terms of identity, and the other is place. You would swear Indigenous cultures were right up to date with the latest neuroscience, because this association with place, the Nobel Prize was awarded for that in 2014. That's how recent the research is showing that memory of place and music are so strong. So by associating each ceremony, each set of information and song and story with a location is optimizing the way the hippocampus and long-term memory works. So a songline, location after location, I have 10 kilometers of Castlemaine now marked out as songlines. I'm doing French and Chinese, and this morning I was doing my history walk and all this. 10 kilometers sounds a lot. It's chicken feed. The Yanyuwa people of Carpentaria, they've mapped out 800 kilometers of songlines, song tracks, all stored in memory. The promise of the songlines, as far as I'm concerned, is in our curriculum, we learn about Indigenous cultures, or we don't learn at all. We need to learn from. These techniques are so valuable to everyone. They are the way our brains naturally work. The promise is that if we listen and learn from songlines, we can never fully grasp them, because we're not Indigenous and we haven't grown up, but we can glimpse enough to be incredibly valuable. The promise is for education, for aging and delaying, depends what sort of dementia, we won't go on that. So the promise is that we can enrich our lives hugely with the third archive. We've got our second archive of writing and technology. We can learn from the first archive of Indigenous knowledge and create a third, which is way more powerful than what we've already got.
Yes, and
you ought to do the
I'll
power.
finish the sentence. Yeah, well, the purpose, I can do it by just mentioning why this exhibition is important, because being the Songlines exhibition, is that what sort of came out of it really is the elders and everyone included, for this all those years of travelling together doing this project, preservation. It wasn't only preservation for them and their younger generations who were not going bush with them anymore, but had their faces in screens and the usual. So basically they're trying to teach Australia, they want to preserve the songlines, right? So we put it into digital domain where the young people are, so that they can find out and download knowledge when they've gone. But it was bigger than that, because what it's really about is they're saying to the whole of Australia, or the world, in fact the world and something, they say, if you want to, we don't mind sharing this continent with you, but if you want to be Australian and truly Australian, then you've got to know your stories beyond the last 240 years. If you don't, you won't take root. You'll only ever be a transplant. And to add on to that, which means you'll only ever be a little voyeur, and it means if you not take root, you won't take responsibility.